it's almost a flaw of mine, where I have almost too much revolutionary optimism. They're not going to defeat me until I'm in the dirt. And what we need to do, you need to figure out what you do for this, what you can do for this movement. I've been put in this very weird position in my life where I'm an educator. While I'm speaking to you guys right now, I guess this is what I do for the movement. But let's say you got stage fright and you can't do this. Let's say you're not someone like Rome who can engage in mutual aid. Let's say you're not someone who like stabby stabs. Let's say you're not like that. You do what you can for the movement. If you're good at baking pies, guess what you need to do when we have a march? Maybe bake a pie. If you're good at sewing, I can. Maybe you should make some shirts. What you need to do, even if you work 60 hours a week, let's say you're doing well in your life, but you still care about the struggle. You work 60 hours a week, got 3 kids, you don't have time. You know what you do? You fund Rome. You fund the mutual aid fighters. There's no revolution without black traders. We need y'all. So that's what my call is. On RBN, we laugh, we cry, make fun of the ruling class, but my main goal is to get people activated. I talk to people who live in China and Russia. I talk to people in the UK, Brazil. Last week I had a Palestinian roundtable. And what people tell me, I always ask them the same question, what should people in America do to help you guys resist this empire? We need to look beyond borders and form an international coalition of anti-imperialism because the war has already started.
What's poppin', my friends, my family? Welcome back to another week of RBN Live. I didn't have a hotspot ready, so I'm like, man, let me just pull this callback for the speech I gave last summer. What's poppin'? There are a lot of people going through some things, and rightfully so. There are a lot of people lost. With the Trump administration incoming, with the genocide that we are witnessing in Syria, the Alawites, what the Palestinians are going through. There's a lot of trauma, and there are a lot of people who are looking for direction. Now it's our time as organizers to reach out to the people who are politically lost and lead them to class-based struggle. And that's why I'm blessed and I'm honored. Like, we have so many different perspectives that join us in RBN. I'm very honored to have very prominent Marxist organizer, scholar, author, Joti Brar join us. Welcome to RBN. I appreciate you making time. Thank you for joining us, Joti.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's very good to be with you.
Yeah, I want to ask you about what the left should be doing this time. And once again, condolences, because I know your late great father passed recently. And I want to ask you about the work that you're currently doing, what the left should be pursuing right now, because I'm seeing a lot of people being head faked by Bernie once again in the United States. Just so to get started, please share a little bit about the work you're doing and the legacy that you continue to carry.
Thank you. Well, the work we do now is the same work that my father was doing for 60 years. And there's a reason for that. It's because although a lot of the surface detail seems to be changing all the time, and we now live in this world of, so many news sources 24 hours a day pumping information at you and making you feel like you've got to keep up. And of course, you can't keep up with it all. And feel like you've got to respond to every change in the surface phenomenon. The reality is that underneath all of that noise, the situation remains the same. The situation we're in is that we are in a stage of decaying imperialism. But the era we're in is the era of the social revolution of the proletariat. Lenin pointed this out all the way back in 1916. He said, imperialism is the eve of the social revolution of the proletariat. What does that mean? It means that when capitalism goes global, all its contradictions go global. And when the capitalist contradictions go global, they get more and more and more glaring, absurd, obscene, impossible to handle for the masses of the world. And they force the working people to revolution as the only solution to their problems. And this is the era we have actually been living in ever since the 1917 October Revolution in Russia. You know, history, we've seen some ups and downs in this revolutionary history, this period, this big epoch in which we're living. But it remains the case that that's the period that we live in. And our job is to build the forces that will successfully bring socialism in whichever country we live. Now, of course, you and I live in the imperialist heartlands.
Yes.
So we have a very particular role, because imperialism can be defeated in different places in the oppressed world. It can be kicked out of a colony here, a colony there. There can be liberated territories, and there have been big liberated territories, you know, bigger and smaller at different times. But right now in the world, there are big liberated territories in the world from imperialist control and domination. But the imperialist system as a whole will not fall purely as a result of the anti-colonial struggle abroad. It has to be smashed at home. That's our job. That's our job. And we have to keep our eyes on that prize, Nick, that we, the working class in the imperialist countries, no matter how difficult the job, no matter how fast asleep a lot of our fellow workers seem to be, no matter how despondent a lot of people feel, because it seems that the imperialist class is just so powerful, so rich, so able to buy off so many people. Nevertheless, its contradictions are driving it into crisis and into a ditch from which it cannot escape except for at our expense, at the expense of the masses in the oppressed world, but also at the expense of the workers at home. And that's what we're experiencing right now, isn't it? Living standards are being pushed down at home, bloodbaths are being engendered abroad, all for the same reason, because the imperialist economy, the global capitalist economy, is in a very deep crisis, and it's getting worse. And the imperialists are actually desperate. They're facing ruin and bankruptcy, and they're looking for paydays. And their payday comes by finding a way to loot the treasury at home, or to push down the pay and conditions of workers at home just a bit more, to privatize something else at home and loot it for all they're worth. And their paydays come by breaking apart and looting big territories abroad. If you look at the successful destruction of Yugoslavia by the imperialists back in through the 90s, really, but culminating with the Yugoslav War, 1999, what did they do to Yugoslavia in order to loot it and break its sovereignty? Broke it into tiny pieces with little comprador ruling classes all fighting one another and filling the heads of the people in each territory with some kind of, you know, pernicious national, you know, fratricidal ideology that tells them their people that they've been living with for the last 50 years, their neighbors, friends and brothers, are now their enemies, right? Get them all fighting one another in little pots so you can try and you can keep them down, you can control them, and you can loot them. This is the plan imperialism has for every single country that stands up to it. Look what they did to Iraq. As soon as the Iraq invasion happened, they started talking about Iraq, not as Iraq, and Iraqis not as Iraqis, but as the northern region with Kurds, the central Sunni region, and the southern Shia region. And they even have different areas of occupation between the Americans and the British to emphasize this. What they were doing was projecting their plan. They were telling us, we want to break Iraq into three pieces. And this is we're telling you a story that tries to justify doing this. Oh, they're three different people, actually. They're not all Iraqis. They're three different people. Look what they're doing in Syria right now. They're constantly telling us a story about Druze and Alawite and Shia and Sunni. And, you know, this is a nonsense. This is an absolute nonsense. This is a projection to justify their plan to balkanize Syria and control it that way. This has nothing to do with the Syrian people. It's their needs, their desires, their wishes, everything to do with imperialist aims. Why? Because Syria was a bulwark of anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist resistance in the Middle East ever since the 1940s. Syria was the strongest state of support for the longest period of time for Palestine, against Zionism. Syria consistently refused to normalize relations with Israel. It's part of the reason the governments there became termed by people locally as dictators. Why? Because they had to defend themselves against constant Zionist onslaught.
Yep.
And so they ended up having to have a very heavy police and secret services machinery because of the constant Zionist infiltration. They were awash with Zionist spies and saboteurs, but they kept an economy and a country that was really quite pro-people. In fact, they built up their own, they were sovereign. They built up their own industry, their own arms industries, their own general industries, their own farming. They had a whole load of things that and a separate monetary system. They had a whole load of things going on that gave them sovereignty, and that the imperialists have now been at pains to very rapidly dismantle and destroy as much as possible. On the first day after Damascus fell, Israeli planes were in bombing the industry of Syria to make sure that it would be very hard for Syria to rise again very quickly. But, they're not going to keep the people down there, forever. Now, sorry, to come back to your question, I went on a side one there. To come back to your question, what should the left be doing? Our job here is to help the workers understand that we are in this fight. We've got to not look at the world like it's a kind of geopolitical baseball game where we hope that other people are going to save us from all the horrors. Maybe Xi Jinping is going to do it. Maybe Vladimir Putin's going to do it. Maybe Donald Trump's going to do it. I know a lot of people are hoping that it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But we got to stop looking at the world like it's a baseball game and we're on the sidelines. We have to understand that those people who are fighting on the front lines in Syria, in Palestine, in Ukraine, in the Donbass of Ukraine, those people are fighting the same class enemy that we have. They're fighting the imperialists. They're fighting the same people who impoverish us at home here and push us down and destroy our livelihoods and our lives and our communities. We have a joint fight against the same enemy. And our job, the best way we can help those who are suffering at the sharp end every day under the bombs of Nato, is to organize resistance and rebellion here at home. We have to organize to bring down the imperialist ruling class and its state machinery and its military machinery and its looting machinery, which sucks the wealth of the world out of the whole planet in order to enrich the teeny tiny class of parasites who are also leeching off of us here. So this is really our job, Nick. We have to organize for socialism, right? And that means bringing together working people and helping them to understand that they have a shared interest in fighting for socialism, which is actually going to deliver them the things that they need, prosperity, peace, development, a life of meaning, and also a life of security and peace.
Yeah, that was one of the great opening monologues in RBN history. Very thoughtful, and there's so much I want to add to that because you make me feel much better. Because I know I have been focusing a lot on the genocide going on in Gaza. I've been covering Syria a lot, the expansionist wars of NATO, and how the Ukrainian working class was destroyed because of the decisions of the West. And I was talking to my RBN friends, like, man, maybe I need to start looking at more domestic issues. But you guys have to understand that opposing empire, as you said, Joti, like we have to embrace the role of being the enemy from within. And especially regarding the Palestine conflict, I mentioned this many times before. I take the correct position of standing for a one-state solution, the end of apartheid, because I know a lot of my Palestinian brothers and sisters can't. It's our job to being people who live within the empire to advocate for the correct positions on behalf of our brothers and sisters who would be retaliated against otherwise. That's why they gotta be tepid. That's why they got dancing. Oh, I support two-state solution. Because if they don't, they will be labeled terrorists. You guys see what they're doing in the United States campus and universities. We're going to cover how Donald Trump is implementing a historic free speech crackdown, but imposing imperialism, especially in this time we're in right now, where even the quote unquote left flanks of the imperialist wings are endorsing never-ending war. You organize in the UK, and the UK, like the Labour Party and the left parties, and I use left very loosely. Just we can always have a conversation what that really means, but just very loosely, the left liberal class, and not just in the UK, but in the entirety of Europe, have completely lost their mind. We are seeing free speech completely non-existent in countries like Germany and the UK when it comes to resisting the state of Israel. So I want you to speak more on that, on how the Green parties all across Europe have been captured by the NATO war machine, and why there's so many people who call themselves social democrats end up actually doing the bidding of U.S. imperialism and UK and European imperialism as well, which fall under that umbrella. But Jodi, do you want to take that on?
Sure. You know, just to pick up your very last point there, social democracy is a political trend in the imperialist countries. And again, Lenin exposed it, and my father wrote a very good book on it as well, Social Democracy, The Enemy Within, explaining that social democracy relies for the small bribe that it achieves for a section of the working class, relies on imperialism and imperialist super profits. So the reason that social democrats who claim, who pretend that they're on the side of the workers and that they want nice things for the working class, always end up supporting imperialist war is that the imperialist looting machine is the source of the bribe that they get and that they pay to a section of the working class, but not the whole working class, but a section that Lenin called the labor aristocracy, right? Now, in the post-World War II situation, because revolution was knocking at the door all across Europe, there was a massive social bribe paid through the blood of the colonial peoples, we have to emphasize, but a massive social bribe was paid, and not just a small layer of the working class, but almost the entire working class got lifted up during that period. What also happened at the same time was that the communist parties basically adopted social democratic programs, put themselves to sleep, and put the working class to sleep, like the class struggle was now over because we've had a bit of a bribe. And of course, what happened? As soon as the post-war boom was over, the ruling class, having successfully dismantled the militant opposition to their rule, started to come for all the gains they've made and undo them. And they have faced almost no opposition. The last meaningful opposition in Britain was the Great Miners' Strike, which is now 40 years ago. That was the last big defeat of organised labour in Britain. And since then, all the attacks on the working class have been carried out with absolutely minimal opposition. And those who have stood up and said that they're leading opposition have all been under the control of the ruling class in one way or another, tied to the Labour Party, which itself is tied to imperialism. So you have these misleaders of the mass movement who always end up channeling opposition of workers back under the control of the very party. You know, Labour Party was the one that was in power when the Iraq and Afghan wars were launched. And it was people tied to the Labour Party who were in charge of the anti-war movement. And we ask ourselves why the anti-war movement in Britain never stopped a war. You know, against the Iraq war, we had 2 million people on the street. Imagine a genuine anti-war leadership, what they could have done with that. I mean, you could have closed down Whitehall, closed down all the bases around London, you know, occupied Parliament, occupied the City of London. You could have done all kinds of things. There's no way that, you know, the British police force is big enough to control 2 million people if they're determined and they're given the right directions. But what were they told, those 2 million people? Wow, this is the biggest demonstration ever in British history. You're all amazing, brilliant, well done. See you next time. And the Stop the War leadership 20 years later, they're still dining out on that story that they organized the biggest, they didn't actually organize it, but, you know, the biggest demonstration ever. It's like, did we just demonstrate to, you know, keep our feet busy? We were there because we wanted to stop the war. And actually the message that a whole load of workers who went on those demonstrations got from that experience was, there's no point trying. Because look how hard we tried. So many people really believed in those days that they could, if there enough of them came on the streets, it would change the government's mind. Surely they'll listen to us. Well, 20 years of experience has made a lot of people very, very cynical. But what it hasn't done is help them to understand why their organized movement keeps failing. Why do the trade unions never win a struggle? Why does the anti-war movement never stop a war? Why does the Palestine solidarity movement not deliver genuine solidarity to Palestine? What is it that's wrong with this leadership? And, you know, it's communists that were needed to explain this, to deliver the education necessary to understand what is imperialism, what is capitalism, what is social democracy, what is it we need to do to get past this apparent impasse and actually become agents again in our own story. You know, ultimately, it's the masses who are the motive force in history, but we have to be educated in order to use the power that we have.
Yeah, very, very well said. The state of social democrats in the United States and the West is they are obsessed with defending these rotten capitalist institutions instead of actually fighting for the working class. Yeah. They defend the institution known as NATO, even though NATO is the enemy of the global working class. And these are things that I'm very proud to learn over the last few years, because I learned a lot on this journey of mine. I remember about 5 to 6 years ago, I used to call myself a social democrat. I heard Bernie's message. I thought it was good. I heard what they used to tell me about Sweden and Norway. And then I learned. I educated myself. I did the due diligence that all workers should do. And I learned how Sweden, Norway, and all those countries benefit and fund genocide. Sweden is one of the largest arms dealing countries in the world, which bankrolled the genocide in Yemen, for example. You see how happy Sweden and Finland was to join NATO and break century-long neutrality in order to join and merge with the capitalist class, because the same calculation that Bernie Sanders, AOC, and the people I jokingly called the NATO left, it meant to be oxymoronic, because they make this devil's bargain that if we help the liberal class achieve their imperialist aims, they may give us scraps at home. So AOC will vote for NATO. They will vote to enable the worst genocidal policies of the Democratic Party in hopes that they will get scraps. And Bernie famously said, and I highlighted it last year, where he made his, well, you can't call it anything else other than a pro-genocide video, where he essentially argued that, yeah, I know we disagree with Biden's policy in Gaza, but there are other issues that are important. Then he went on to gaslight and mislead the working class people who follow him that Biden would deliver for them if only we support his genocidal policies. And these are ways that social democrats like Bernie enable imperialism. And I want to play this video, and I want you to respond to this, because this is just ridiculous. Big shout out to Zay Squirrel for sharing this. But Bernie Sanders is not even making an anti-capitalist argument anymore. He's straight up making the false argument that the United States has always stood for democracy, that we fight for democracy in Ukraine, that Ukraine is a democracy despite the fact that they crack down on socialist parties. And this is the messaging that is coming from the quote-unquote Bernie Sanders left. Let's listen to this.
We are all proud. I think we wake up in the morning, we know it, it's part of who we are as Americans. We are proud that we are the longest standing democracy in the world.
Who is this for?
You know? And we are proud, and I mean this sincerely, that all over the world, people read our Declaration of Independence, they read the Constitution, and they say, you know what, that's what we want our country to be like, a country that is free, a country that is democratic. But I have
for the left of the United States, guys,
tell you that for the first time in our 250-year history, we have a president who is turning his back on democracy.
The first time.
Allying us with authoritarianism. As all of you know, there was a terrible attack by Hamas against Israel. 1,200 innocent people were killed. Israel had a right to respond. But Israel did not have the right to wage an all-out war against the Palestinian people.
Israel has the right to respond as the colonial state, but I feel a little bit too uncomfortable with how many they killed. Condemning resistance, whitewashing the crimes of the United States, pretending there was a democracy. Joti, please respond. This is the state of the United States left that we are dealing with. And I'm going to show you guys this article. I know people are like, oh, Nick, why are you picking on Bernie? Guys, we are still, we are RBN community here, but there are a lot of people falling for this. And we got to be here to correct. Look, drawing huge crowds, Bernie Sanders step into leadership of the anti-Trump resistance. So, Joti, please respond.
The anti-Trump resistance says it all, doesn't it? This is a fight between factions of the ruling class about the best way to survive of the worst ever, deepest ever global crisis of overproduction. This is not some glorious resistance on behalf of working people or oppressed people anywhere. This is trying to galvanize you to support a faction of the ruling class against another faction of the ruling class in the USA. That's what this is. There are so many things that you could pull out and unpick about that speech that Bernie put up. In relation to Palestine, I'm sure all your viewers know, but this Hamas's terrible attack, this narrative that puts one act of the resistance out of all of its context. Who was attacking whom, in what conditions and why? What was the 76 years that led up to that moment? And what did it mean in that context? Who were they attacking? The soldiers on the bases that keep them locked in and penned in and starved. And even just the fact that he repeats, although there's been all this time to debunk it. The day after the attack, when the news was hysterical, if you're stupid enough to repeat hysterical news coverage the first day before you've had a chance to get better information, well, you might be forgiven for saying 1,200 innocent people killed. But all of that's been debunked. It was being debunked within a week. I personally never believed it. For me, when the media's being hysterical, wall-to-wall hysteria, that's a signal to stay quiet, listen and wait and see until some of the truth starts coming out. Because wall-to-wall hysteria, what that says to you is the ruling class is trying to program you and trying to give you an emotional response to something that they want you to think and they want you to do, right? It's their agenda, the wall-to-wall news hysteria. It's not yours, right? And we've got to start learning this. And, this is the importance of this is my father's legacy, right? This is the importance of a scientific socialist education, that you can keep your bearings when the media is trying to push you around and manipulate you with hysteria. What we're looking at with this, what's going on in Europe and what's going on with the anti-Trump resistance, it's a fight between sections of the imperialist ruling class in each country and internationally about what to do. The British ruling class, I know particularly, is terrified at the thought that the Ukraine war might be stopped, and the attack on Russia might be stopped, because they have bet the farm on this plan working out. They need this payday. They need the payday, not just of looting all of Ukraine. And let's remember, as the battle lines currently stand, all the most important resources of Ukraine, apart from some of its very amazing farmland, almost all the other mineral resources, the coal. I mean, I don't know how much truth there is in some of the stuff that's being floated around, but we know that there's lots of coal there. We know that there's lots of other resources, but it's all in the industrial part, the part that was industrialized by the Soviet Union, let's not forget, and which is now under Russian control and is rejoining Russia. So, the payday from Ukraine is seriously upset if that remains the case. But more than that, the payday that the West and Europe in particular has promised itself and that they have bet so much on is the payday of looting Russia.
Yeah.
They believed if they just kept this up for long enough, they would create a situation of political instability inside Russia, that the Putin government would fall, they would be able to put their proxies in place, divide the country up. Remember, even, I think it was as long as 2 years ago, the EU were running seminars on what they called, can you believe it, the cheek, decolonizing Russia. And what they meant by that was cutting Russia into pieces for better looting purposes. So they say all this stuff. It's out there in the public domain. It's just that most people don't really come across it or put it all together and understand what it means. They have a need to get this payday, the payday of looting Russia. Let's not forget we've got a good example in history of what this looks like. What happened when the revisionist Soviet Union failed to counter-revolution in 1991? The imperialists got a massive payday, and it was a very crucial moment because there was a big global overproduction crisis that was building through the 80s. There was a lot of social unrest. There was a lot of industrial turmoil. In Britain, we had the miners' strike, and we had many other strikes, and there was a lot of, anti-unemployment movement, and there was a lot of anger of the poor getting poorer, and not feeling like there was a way out for them. The payday that came from the collapse and looting of the former Soviet and People's Democracy territories was really saved the day for the imperialists in the West, saved their system, gave them a massive injection. And of course, it gave them an ideological injection as well, because they could say to the protesting workers, look, there's no alternative but capitalism. Just suck it up, mate. So, and that for a while that worked a lot. The workers became very demoralized. The communist movement was in total disarray and retreat. It looked like class struggle was really a kind of a thing of the past. That period is over. That shot in the arm that the ruling class got from that is long gone. They desperately need another one. And they had really convinced themselves that Russia did not have the wherewithal to stand up to the united economic power. It was really the economic power they thought was going to win the day for them. They thought that Russia is going to fall under the weight of our sanctions blitzkrieg. And it didn't, and it boomeranged. And they are in desperation now. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a desperation to just, they're still telling themselves, because they can't really bear the thought of the alternative, because they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So they're still telling themselves, if we just do one more year, just a little push longer, Russia's going to fall. We're nearly there. You just got to keep it going. And all this pressure in the newspapers is really aimed, and their anti-Trump movement is all aimed at trying to make Trump the Trump administration, and that, it's not Trump the man, is it? But it's the section of the ruling class that Donald Trump represents, is to try to push them onto the back foot and to change their mind about trying to find a way out of the Ukraine war. But the reality is, the reason that section of the ruling class has been put into office is precisely because enough members of the US ruling class recognize that this war they started, they have lost. They've lost it. They need to get out of it. But putting Donald Trump in charge is a way of face saving. It's narrative management. Because instead of saying we've been defeated, you say Donald Trump decided. He just gave up and walked away. If he'd have stayed a bit longer, we probably would have won. So there's a whole load of narrative management going on. But essentially, it's an acknowledgement and recognition. No matter what bluster, Donald Trump likes to do about we're the big guys and, blah, blah, we can do whatever we want and everybody has to listen to us and talk to us and do what we tell them. He's there to organize the defeat of NATO in Ukraine. That's his job.
That was extremely well said, and that's why I don't know why it's shocking to people in the West that Russia view the Ukraine war as existential for them, because the West have been trying to destroy Russia for centuries now. It go back from even the Napoleon days. The Europeans have this obsession with destroying and controlling Russia, and they got really close to the fall of the Soviet Union. And this is not praise for Putin. Putin is warlike for people. It's just an objective fact that Putin took a pathetic post-Soviet state, like late 90s, early 2000s, Russia was very weak, impoverished. He took that, and now Russia is a superpower, leading BRICS, about to hand a giant defeat for NATO. And Putin took that country and restored it. And the West will never forgive him for that, which is why they're going all in for this war. And Ukraine will quickly learn. And you explained this before. There's so many great things that you said how to break down, but you explained how the West had plans to carve up Ukraine, to carve up these proxies that they use. And Ukraine is learning the hard way now that they're going to be completely owned by BlackRock. I hope that Taiwan is paying attention. For example, I find it funny, like the entirety of the Democrat liberal left, the Bernie left, they had a meltdown over how Trump spoke to Zelensky in the White House, for example. And I explained how that White House exchange between Trump and Zelensky is very common, like for how like the United States would talk to African leaders, for example, the way they talk to William Ruto of Kenya, where they essentially demanded him to send Kenyan police forces to Haiti. And now the Kenyan police forces, they're taking losses. They're dying because it was ordered by the Western government. William Ruto was lectured like a child. The Kenyan Supreme Court overruled William Ruto's order, and he still did it illegally because that's how much he's owned by the West. The West give these leaders demands and they follow. So there are a lot of people who were shocked at how Zelensky was talked to by Donald Trump in the United States. That's how they treat their proxies. And I really hope that Taiwan is paying attention. I want to get to something else you mentioned, because you mentioned Syria. There's so much you said. It was very informative, but I want to rewind a little bit to Syria. And how the professional managerial class of the United States left essentially cheer for this outcome. They cheer for the downfall of Assad. And once again, I'm not saying I'm ideologically aligned with Assad at all. But as you mentioned before, Syria was the heart of resistance. Assad armed the resistance. And now Syria is ran by a group of Muslim Zionists who are begging for the approval and friendly relationships with Israel, that are committing genocide against the Alawites and fighting and suppressing dissent in their own country, instead of fighting against the Israelis that is occupying and stealing 40% of the water supply. But that's a whole nother range. You did a great job breaking that down. But the professional managerial class, like the Al Jazeera's, who still refuse to properly cover this. Now, here's Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, and there are still people that think they're not nefarious. Like, I knew Democracy Now! Was nefarious when they started pushing Russiagate. I'm not even saying that I was early on the train. I was still late. But once they start pushing Russiagate, I was like, I'm out. But you guys see how Democracy Now! Is repeating the same headline that coming from the New York Times. Look how disgusting this is. 70 killed as Syrian forces clash with Assad loyalists. Amy Goodman, Democracy Now!, they killed women and children, and covering up the crimes of the Syrian regime. They were just labeling the people that they slaughtered as Assad loyalists. And the best faith interpretation that you can have of this is that Assad was an Alawite, and these people was Alawites. So they must have been loyalists. Can you, just to highlight how crazy this is, and I'll pass to you, Jody, for your thoughts. But can you imagine if Donald Trump and MAGA started killing black people because black people overwhelmingly supported Barack Obama? That's essentially what Democracy Now! And all the people who are apologizing for the Syrian regime, that is what they're doing. They're going after the Alawites because Assad was an Alawite, and there was one of the minorities that he protected. So they just mass killing, going door to door. And this is based on citizen journalists like Rania Khalek that I follow. Korvac, we had him on the show before. They going door to door killing the Alawites, and people like Democracy Now! Is paying it as they're killing Assad loyalists. So the reason why I did that long setup, because we've seen how the professional managerial Arab class, the Al Jazeera, they cheer for this. Now they're still trying to cover this up. And this also shows how they enable this kind of war crimes and imperialism in a way, right? What's your thoughts? Because what's coming from Syria is a tragedy. It's very tragic to see it happen. Do you have any thoughts, Joti?
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific what's happening in Syria. I'm someone who was on the side of the Syrian people against this war from 2011. My party was writing articles, holding meetings, propagandizing, trying to get through. And of course, the entire anti-war movement in Britain, and I'm sure in the USA was the same, was absolutely betrayed Syria completely. And more than any other force, I hold the anti-war movement responsible for what's happening to the Syrian people now. They totally failed to mobilize anybody against that war. And all they did was repeat Western propaganda, just like you're seeing now. I think one thing that this horrific situation has done for us to help us in our tasks at home is to show us far more clearly who are our enemies. Right now, there's loads of people jumping on the bandwagon pretending to be supporters of Palestine. Anyone who says they're a supporter of Palestine and against the genocide, who has cheered for the fall of the Syrian government and the Syrian Arab Republic, anybody who's done that, they're your enemy. They're not a friend of the working class. They're not a friend of the movement. They're a tool of imperialism inside our movement. They need to be exposed and chased out of the movement. And we must not put our faith in these people. Absolutely not. They are facilitating these massacres, these slaughters. The blood price that the people of the Middle East keep paying, they're helping that to happen. And they are stopping the workers in the West from understanding what's going on, stopping us from organizing to deliver the solidarity that's needed. The solidarity we can deliver is not charity. It's not sending handouts across the seas. It's organizing at home to stop the war machine. And we have the power to do that if we organize for it. But our leaders are there busy promoting the propaganda of the imperialists against the very people we should be on the same side with. And it's utterly disgusting. I feel very strongly about this, Nick. I personally felt very, really heartbroken to see the fall of Syria because I thought that they had got through the worst. And I knew that the financial pressures they've been put under were horrific. I knew that essentially the sanctions and bombing campaign and the jihadi campaign combined had created a kind of genocide situation. The numbers of young people, and especially young men who'd had to leave the country just to earn a living, meant that it was very, very hard to pull the economy back together. And of course, the way the Kurds have been instrumentalized to enable the US occupation of the oil and wheat fields of Assad, of Syria, that helped to bleed the country and stop it being able to defend itself and get back up on its knees. So, it's very easy for us to play this baseball game and criticize from the side and say, Russia should have done this, Iran should have done this, Hezbollah should have done this, and Assad made this mistake and that mistake. What I saw from where I was standing was President Assad stood at the head of a popular anti-imperialist resistance against the most horrific genocidal assault on his country for well over a decade. And he didn't leave willingly. He left when he was forced to. And everything that happened, we bear far more responsibility, I'm afraid, than President Assad does. We did not do our job. We, in fact, the anti-war movements, the anti-imperialist movements, so-called, all the fake leaders in the West facilitated what is now happening, these massacres, pogroms, bloodbaths. Just coming back to the kind of fake media also, let's not, well, perhaps people don't realize, but Al Jazeera, it's situated in a state which is basically controlled by the West. It was set up and its first tranche of staff, I don't know if it's an ongoing relationship or not, but I know when Al Jazeera was first set up, it was basically set up because BBC Arabic had lost credibility amongst Middle Eastern viewers. And it was BBC staff who trained the Al Jazeera journalists that set up Al Jazeera. Right, so it's basically a continuation of BBC Foreign Office policy to send media, that the Arabs might trust. You wrap it up and put a nice Arabic logo on the top of it and give it a nice Arabic sounding name, and you pretend to be on the side of the people. But yeah, look at this, Assad loyalists like Assad. This thing about Assad, the evil dictator, and anyone who wants a democratic, secular Syria along the old lines is a loyalist of an evil dictator. I mean, this narrative is insane.
They're essentially saying that if you disagree and you resist a United States empire, you are a free target. You're free reign to be killed, and you should be smeared as a Assad loyalist. And to your point, guys, what did Assad gain by supporting the Palestinian resistance, guys? Like Assad could have sold out. Like what stopped Assad from going the Jelani route and just straight up selling the people out, securing his reign? He could have reigned forever. Like imagine if he just sold out his people to Israel, how long he could have reigned at the top. He decided to continue to arm the resistance, and he paid for it. I mean, the United States was occupying Syria illegally. You had sanctions that hollowed out the government, so that he had no way to respond. And once again, just as someone who lived in the heart of the empire, I understand your frustration as well, because I'm not going to stay on the sidelines as a taxpayer to the empire. Oh, this is what Assad should have done. It seemed like he had such a devastating situation to handle, especially the crippling sanctions that people like cheer for. People like Mehdi Hassan. Like this is why I always distrust these people. Remember Cenk Uygur, Samir, Aaron Mate, Anna Kasperi, and these people who have, once again, way more influence than I do among the United States, quote unquote, left. They smeared anyone who spoke out against the Syrian war, who didn't support sanctions, who didn't repeat the talking points of propaganda against Assad. These are the same people who turn around and tell you that Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela is a tyrant because he has the nerve to resist CIA operation in this country. These are the same people that tell you North Korea is evil for having the audacity of resisting United States imperialism after the United States killed 2 million Koreans because they had the audacity of choosing a different economic model than them. You guys see how the United States left always, the first step is to condemn resistance and side with the empire for people who actually stand up against it. The same people who condemn October 7th. I know we talked about that earlier. These are the same people who stand with Palestinians. They will say we stand with Palestinian resistance until the Palestinian resistance is too successful. Because God forbid you have a successful act of resistance, then we got to condemn it as terrorism. You guys see how they brainwashed the United States left? And that's why it's so refreshing to have you on there, Joti. It's great to have your expertise and hearing you break this down. There's so many things I always want to go back on what you said. One more thing I'll add before I move on was because there are all these people who fell for, well, let me be charitable, because we have the propagandists, then we have people who are victims of the propaganda. There are the people who fell for the Mehdi Hassans. There are people who didn't realize that Mehdi Hassan was bad until like the last few months. And Mehdi Hassan was one of the cheerleaders of the Syrian regime change. And I understand that Syria is slightly harder to understand than Palestine. To me, I think Palestine is very easy. Like, it's just a straight up issue of settler colonialism. Syria, it just takes a few seconds. Like, to me, I think it is a little bit trickier for, like, if you, like, new, it's a little bit trickier to understand. But it just takes a little bit of digging, a little bit of research into what the CIA did to Syria, what Obama did to Syria, why the United States occupying, what Assad did. It's a little bit harder to understand in Palestine, but the information is readily available, which makes the people who betray the people of Syria, like you outlined, Joti, even more detestable. But I know I ran. Anything else you want to add to this topic? I want to get to our last topic. We will wrap up soon. I don't want to take too much more of your time. But anything else you want to add about Syria, or anything else that people should know before I move on to our last topic, which was the main topic of the day regarding Donald Trump cracking down on protests. We'll cover that here soon. But any last thoughts on Syria, Joti? I know you're very passionate about this, and I learned a lot from people like you. So please continue.
I just feel like, a red flag should go up for anybody when you see ruling class media and their obedient servants in the supposedly left-wing movement demonizing some leader of a foreign country. Because it's always, as you said there, Nick, you already said it, but I just want to underline it. It's always for the same reason. And it's not even to do with social systems. They don't care if they're democratic or dictatorial. They don't care if they're socialist. They don't care if they're feudal. They don't care if they're capitalist, if they're an oligarch. That's not what it is. What it is if you stand up for your people and for your country's sovereignty. In my lifetime, I have seen so many leaders who are standing up for their countries. And And that's in my political lifetime, not even in my whole lifetime. It was happening all through my childhood too, but I wasn't paying so much attention. But in my political lifetime, I mean, I've watched Robert Mugabe be demonized when Zimbabwe was renationalizing its land. I saw Slobodan Milosevic be demonized when he was standing up for Yugoslavia against Nato. Saddam Hussein, it goes one after the other. Muammar Gaddafi, there's, as you said, Chavez and then Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, and President Assad, of course, in Syria. And when you put them all next to each other, they're not a homogenous group, are they? They're not running the same type of state. It's not a particular type of system that they represent. It's one thing they have in common. That's standing up to the imperialists and saying, it's up to our people how we use our resources. We have the right to sovereignty and to decide our own destiny. And the imperialists say, no, you don't. And our propaganda goes into overdrive, and we get this hysterical wall-to-wall drive to soften us up and confuse us and generate emotions. And the emotions are, supposed to then stop us from thinking properly about what's actually happening here. And we get this hysterical wave of propaganda. And the number of times I've seen it, the person is branded as the new Hitler. They might have got a bit bored of using that one now, but for about 20 years, literally every year, the ruling class was throwing us a new Hitler. This guy's a new Hitler.
They still do it with Putin, trust me.
To justify their new drive to war. This is the new Hitler. This is the new Hitler. This is the new Hitler. So yes, they're doing it with President Putin as well. They do it with President Xi Jinping. They do it with Kim Jong-un in the DPRK.
People who started no wars. People who started no wars get called Hitler.
And who are not threatening you in any way.
They are sanctioning the International Court of Justice to protect the current Hitler, Benjamin Netanyahu, as they call leaders who don't wage war Hitler. Isn't it hilarious? But sorry, I didn't. Please finish your thought.
No. You finised my point. It's absolutely right. And that was all I wanted. I just wanted to emphasize what you said, Nick, which is that it should put up a big red flag for you when the media is universally telling you to hate somebody and what an awful character they are, because the ruling class don't care if someone's an awful character. They don't care if they're killing their own people. If it's our guy killing his own people, he's a flipping hero. You said earlier about Zelensky. This guy's a full-on stooge, right?
Yeah.
One of the reasons they got really upset with Donald Trump was because he actually pointed out that he made him look like a stooge. And he even made a joke about his costume, which is like a reminder to people that this guy's an actor, right? He's a stooge. He's a puppet. He's not. But if he was a president, he's earned all of the opprobrium that they heap on the heads of other people, right? He stood at the front of his country while it's been sending all of its young men to a war they can't win for the benefit of another country, right? Or another group of countries for outside interests. It's not in the interests of the Ukrainian people to be fighting this war. They're fighting their brother people. They're dying. They can't win. They're being sacrificed, deliberately sacrificed. We've heard your Senator Lindsey Graham congratulate Americans on the fact that none of them have died in protecting American interests in Ukraine. So it's good value for money, he tells you. It's only costing us Ukrainian lives. Don't worry about it. And don't worry if we run out of Ukrainians, because we're doing our best to get all the people in the Baltic states and Poland ready to go into the front lines and, be massacred for our interests as well. The whole thing is so disgusting, and they're doing it in plain sight, but we need to wake up a little bit, I think, Nick.
Yeah, very, very well said. I think, as you mentioned before, when you highlighted how peace movements fail to stop wars, that was something very powerful you said, and that's why I think a lot of people in the West failed at was that they failed to humanize the enemies of the empire. I'm not ever saying that any of these leaders are perfect, but they want you to have a raging hatred for Nicolas Maduro. They want you to have a raging hatred for Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And to me, the nerve of the Bernie Sanders left to hate Putin, who they actually have free healthcare in Russia. They had paid maternity leave. They got paid time off. You know what I mean? And for you to hate them when you fail to provide that in your country as a social democrat, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. We need to humanize the people they tell us to hate. There's nothing wrong with admiring other cultures because they want you to be distrustful and hate other cultures, to hate the Chinese, they'd be distrustful of Iran. We got to stop that. I think that's the failure to do that is one reason why the left has haven't been effective at the peace movement, because they will say, "Oh, well, we want to end war, but I also think that Hamas is evil, and I think North Korea is evil, but yeah, we should end sanctions on it." Like it doesn't land. It doesn't land. They have their own interests. There are people looking out for their own people, and then just because they resist the United States empire doesn't make them evil. But anyway, I'm gonna read just a few super chats here, and then we get to the last part of the stream here. Thank you for the 499 Janice. We should refer to them as hoarders, welfare queens, not elite, ruling class. I like calling them criminals. That's a good one. They're ruling class criminals. This from John. Thank you for the super chat. I am curious how Joti would compare liberal feminism versus a communist perspective on the experience for women. Do you have any quick thoughts on that, Joti? If you want to take that on?
That's a whole nother video. What I can tell you is on my party's YouTube channel, Proletarian TV, there is more than one video of me talking about this question. There's one particular video I made called Women's Liberation Needs Socialism, which is a very good starting point for that.
Yeah, very well. So I want to cover this. This is what I actually put as one of the main stories today. This is why it was always ridiculous when people pretended that there was a free speech right. And we're seeing the willingness of the MAGA wing of imperialism. You can call it, just for lack of a better term, you have the evangelical Christian wing of the empire, then you have the neoliberal. They all Zionists. And as they pretend to stand for free speech, they're now going after students. And correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I pay attention to these protests, and they're very honorable. It's very great what's going on here. But there wasn't even inherently that radical. And what I mean by that, it wasn't, and I pay attention to their demands and everything. It wasn't like they was coming out in favor of Hamas. You know what I mean? It was these people, these students, they was protesting so that Columbia and Harvard, for example, would divest from Israel. That's the craziest thing about these stories to me. They wasn't organizing for a one-state solution. And guys, please don't say I'm not condemning them. I think what they did is great. But they wasn't like going for the super anti-imperialist position. A lot of these people, they were simply protesting so their college would divest from Israel. So this guy here he organized. He was a green card carrying immigrant, not even a legal immigrant, and he was deported for organizing protests, simply calling for the divestment for Israel. Do you guys see the true fascism that has taken place here? The cracking down on dissent. So this will be our last thing we cover here. This is Trump. We covered this many times before, doing what he promised, waging a war against free speech, which, as we understand, both wings of the capitalist class will always wage a battle against anyone who challenged their true power. And Zionists, the weak wing of the empire, and now they see this opening. They see a new generation questioning this. They're seeing the working class questioning this. And if you think they will ever give up anything without struggle, without a little bit of tyranny, you're out of your mind. And as the polls continue to show that more people in the West are turning against Israel, this is only going to get worse. So Joti, I want you to respond on, and this is very broad too, because we're seeing the same thing in the UK and Germany. So it's a Western. I like to say Donald Trump waging the war against free speech just to poke at the MAGA people. But to be clear, this is the entirety of this is a Western government aligned thing. So please, I would love to hear your thoughts about this, Joti. The Zionist crackdown against free speech.
you may not be aware, Nick, that our party members have also been arrested for standing with Palestine. They're arrested on 2 separate occasions under 2 separate laws. Once they were arrested for selling our party's pamphlet. Hang on, I'll show you a copy.
See, Jody, that's based up. That's base work they're doing there.
Zionism, a racist, anti-Semitic, and reactionary tool of imperialism, written by my father. So comrades were arrested for this, and they were told that because of the artwork, which shows you the connection in a very clear and slightly, of course, provocative, but factually correct, historically correct, shows you the connection between Zionism and Nazism, connection in terms of its ideology, but also connection historically. There's a connection. And this is a little history book that explains some of that to people, right? They were first of all arrested under hate crime legislation, and then they were arrested under anti-terror legislation for a leaflet we gave out, which simply said that the Al-Aqsa flood operation was a resistance operation, and that the Palestinian people have the right to resist. And of course, that right is recognized under international law. But we were told that by using the words Al-Aqsa flood, we had inadvertently supported Hamas. Although we didn't mention Hamas, we just talked about resistance. And of course, Hamas is a proscribed organization in Britain. So they tried to get us under anti-terror laws. They didn't succeed. They spent ages keeping our arrested comrades on bail conditions, which basically meant they were off the streets, right? And what we're seeing increasingly in Britain is this situation where, because the genocide is so blatant, because they don't yet have a kind of special court system for processing Palestine activists that is going to secure convictions, what the police are doing instead is arresting people, raiding their houses. I mean, all the people who are arrested, they had their homes raided by armed police in the middle of the night. You know, their families scared, things taken out of their houses, all the rest of it. So they get all this pressure. They're kept on bail conditions for a long time, and the bail conditions are rolled over another 3 months, and then after like a year, the case is dropped. Right? Yeah. That's what's happened so far, because at this moment in time, the legal framework isn't there to deliver convictions. The ruling class understands that although they make good headlines arresting people on terror charges, what they're not really going to do at this moment is get a conviction from a jury on these charges, because it's obviously nonsense and because there's so much anger and disgust with the genocide. So we see 2 things in Britain. We see the move towards setting up a legal framework that bypasses juries. We have history of this in Britain. They used that against the Irish national liberation struggle, that a whole parallel legal system that basically did fast track, from someone being arrested, a fast track process where they're almost immediately put in court with a single judge and no jury. So it's basically rubber stamp and then straight into jail. So we see the beginnings of something like that being set up in Britain. They're certainly testing the water for it, and I think they've got that planned if this carries on much longer. But the reason that they're targeting it so desperately, as you were talking about, is because the widespread revulsion of what's been going on in Gaza and the widespread knowledge of what's been going on has led a whole load of people to suddenly wake up and ask themselves, what is Zionism? And the problem with that is when people actually start looking, a lot of people for a long time, they didn't ask themselves what is Zionism. They went, this whole Israel-Palestine thing, because that's what the media told them. Israel-Palestine, it's very complicated. You couldn't really get it. These people just seem to like fighting each other. There's no solution. You can't, 2 sides, and it's all very difficult. But the genocide made it much clearer, and it made people look for answers. And what you have is a growing movement of people who are educating themselves, what is Zionism? And this is the problem for imperialism, because becoming anti-Zionist and educating yourself against Zionism means becoming anti-imperialist. So what we're starting to get is the beginning of an anti-imperialist consciousness in the heart of the Palestine movement. That's what they're moving to suppress. That's what terrifies them. That's the germ of a genuine revolutionary consciousness, where people start to understand what role our own governments have in these things that seem to be far away. This is not, there isn't, as you said right at the beginning, there isn't this artificial split between, foreign affairs and home affairs, right? The genocide is our business because it was incited by, it's fueled by, it's pushed by our own governments and ruling classes because of imperialism, right? Zionism, the Zionist colony, is a tool of the imperialists to control the resources of the Middle East. It's not just some weird thing that happened that no one can make any sense of. There's a history to it. There's a reason for it being there. There's a reason it's backed unconditionally. There's a reason why no one can be president of the USA or prime minister of Britain who's not a Zionist. It's not because the tail wags the dog. It's not the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby is in charge. It's because Middle Eastern resources are of central importance to the imperialist global system. They need that oil. They need to control that oil. And if they lose control, they're in very, very big trouble. And so their support for Zionism, despite its exposure, continues. And that creates also a social instability at home that they then need to try to get control of.
Very well said. Thank you for taking us to school today, Jodi. It's always great to have you on RBN. So many issues to discuss. Any last shout outs? Any words that you want to share to the audience what the left should be doing right now? Any final thoughts you have before we wrap up, Jodi?
I feel like I've said my main things for today. I guess I'd like to say, slightly belatedly, but not very, happy International Working Women's Day to all of the working class women out there and the women who are fighting for socialism. I definitely would recommend people who are interested in those topics to go to my party's YouTube channel, Proletarian TV. We've got so much educational material. And for those who'd like to know more about Syria, we've got some good videos on Syria on that channel, but also come to our website, thecommunists.org. We have the whole Syria war is documented there on that website. And it's really worth, equipping yourself with a knowledge of the blow by blow, how this transpired, and all of the lies that have been told about Syria for the last 15 years. It's very useful for us. It's a very important education for us now, and we can't be in a situation of letting these things continue to happen while we just sit on the side and feel a bit confused.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Jodi. And this is why it's very important for us to talk to our comrades and our brothers and sisters in other countries in the UK. I'm very honored to have you on and learn from you. We all have to look beyond the borders because the capitalists don't look at the borders. We gotta come together as an international proletariat. That's why I'm glad that tomorrow we're gonna have Counterpoint China on as well. So I'm just honored to have different comrades from Russia, UK, France, and you join us as well, because this is the fight against Zionism is the fight of our lifetime, man. The fight against the current imperial regime is the fight that will define our generation. And appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. So thank you guys. Make sure you guys check out tomorrow. Counterpoint China will be joining us at 8 p.m. It'll be a Rare Nick at Night live stream. So check us out tomorrow. Make sure you guys support Joti Brar. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Peace out, y'all.